Hi, my name is Andy Gillies. I'm a freelance interpreter and an interpreter trainer at ISIT in Paris. I'm also the coordinator of IEK's Training and Professional Development Group. And today I'd like to give you a few ideas about language enhancement at the very high levels required for conference interpreters. These exercises will probably be most attractive to those of you adding a B language or learning a B language, but actually they work also for your A languages. Not least of all because there is an overlap in these exercises between language enhancement and general knowledge. There is an element of general knowledge to these exercises as well. So, the exercises. The first one I call label spotting, and this is actually something a colleague at the European Parliament, Nick Woodman, told me about many years ago. Thank you, Nick. For this exercise you will need a big store. My particular favourites are DIY shops, but home fitting shops, electrical fitting shops, supermarkets all work just as well. So what's the idea? Well, wander around the shop and you'll see an awful lot of very varied objects on sale. Do you know what they are? First of all in your A language, obviously, but then also in your B language. If you don't know what they are in your A language, then you have a little hole in your general knowledge. You need to find out. If you don't know what they are in your B language, then you probably want to get your smartphone out and look up online what this object is. That's usually made a little bit easier for you in a shop because every article has a label in front of it, and on that label, in one language or another, will be the name of the item that's being sold. So if you don't know what that is in your other languages, you can easily Google it to find out. What I would recommend is that you not look for translations, but rather you look for the name in Google Images. So you Google Images search the name of the item and see if the picture that comes up corresponds to the object that you have in front of you. That is probably a more reliable way of checking the terminology. Then, once you've found out what the thing is called, and there's an example on the screen now of what you might see, that's one thing, but do you know the verb or the collocation that it goes with? What goes with an orbital sander? Well, you might want to operate an orbital sander, for example. Or if you're in a furniture shop, you see a sofa bed. What do you do with a sofa bed? You fold out a sofa bed, you fold up a sofa bed, you pack away a sofa bed. The terminology is interesting, but the collocation is useful. Okay, so that's the first exercise. The second one, again, I owe this exercise to a colleague at the European Parliament, David Walker this time. Thank you, David. This is reading specialist magazines. And this is a really fun exercise to do. It's a little bit nerdy, but it can be very interesting. What you'll need is a fairly good newsagent that sells specialist magazines. What is a specialist magazine? Something like Aeroplanes Today, Train Weekly, Market Gardener's Review, Potholing Monthly. A magazine that focuses on one single subject in some detail. Now these magazines are interesting because they're not necessarily for such specialists that they're inaccessible to the amateur. There's a certain amount of explanation in them because these magazines are aimed at specialists and interested native speaker amateurs. And that's the level that you as an interpreter really want to be aiming for in terms of technical terminology. The interested native speaker amateur. So if you pick up, for example, Potholing Weekly and you read it once, you'll see there's an awful lot of stuff in there that you've absolutely no idea how to translate into other active languages. But if you read it, say, 3 or 4 times over the course of 3 or 4 months, different editions, obviously, you'll notice that some things come up again and again and again. And these are the interesting terms and expressions, because they're obviously the core vocabulary for that particular subject area. And if you look those up, then they will come up again, and that repetition will mean that you tend not to forget them. Looking up something that comes up once and never comes up again, you'll forget it. The stuff that's repeated again and again and again will also stick in your mind, and the next time you read the magazine, it'll be there again, and you'll see it again, you'll remember it again. Let me just give you a quick example, because I wasn't joking with the potholing. I really did read the Polish Potholers magazine, and I can just give you, for example, 10 key words from potholing that make it much easier to understand everything about potholing, and they are the following, which I've now learnt in Polish. To describe underground caves and the activity of potholing, you have chambers underground. Karstification is a process in rock formation. They talk about passages or series of caves. They talk about shafts and sinks or sumps. They also talk about squeezes, which is, as you might imagine in English at least, a narrow part of the cave. But the translation into other languages is very different. They talk about karst springs. And there's a number of colloquial terms for potholers, which you'll come across. It's only 10 words, but it gives you the beginning of an expert terminology in that area. And you'll learn quite a lot in terms of general knowledge as well by reading these magazines. So I really recommend that. Another byproduct is that you might actually develop curiosity for these weird and wonderful technical areas, and that sort of random and generalized curiosity is very useful for an interpreter, because when someone hands you a packet of documents, you need to be curious about what's in them in order to prepare them and prepare your meeting. And the last exercise I wanted to tell you about today is a very old-fashioned one. I call it Learn by Heart. And the idea is that you pick nice, short passages of really well-written language in one of your active languages. 3 or 4 lines is plenty, even 2 or 3. Literature's nice, and it makes a nice party trick to be able to quote literature. But actually, for the interpreter, more useful is probably high-quality journalism. So for in English, for example, things like the Financial Times or the Economist might be more readily useful. So what do? You pick 2 or 3 lines, you learn them off by heart on a Monday. On Tuesday morning, you check to see whether you still know the lines you learnt on Monday and go through them again. And then you pick another 2 or 3 lines and you learn them. On Wednesday, you check that you still know Monday and Tuesday's lines, and you learn Wednesday's lines. On Thursday, you repeat the process again. What you'll see happening is this repetition will mean that you very readily remember each of the sets of lines. But more importantly, after about 15 to 20 days, you'll have built up a body of language which starts to appear in your active use of that same language. So some of these expressions will just pop in when you're using the language. And that's why I just wanted to explain why this is useful, how and what pops into your active language. Well, first of all, entire phrases. If you have a look at the text that's on the screen now, you can see a fairly standard bit of parliamentary English taken from a speech given by a minister in the House of Commons. And it would be very easy, having learnt the entire passage, to simply use the part at the beginning. During the last few days, concern has been expressed in the media. Now that's a very nice expression. If you're using English as a B language or a young student, it's probably not the normal register you would speak in. but it's usable in all sorts of different circumstances, and it's a very nice bit of English. So you can just take it out and use it immediately. The same goes for the last part of the extract, where it says, this afternoon I will set out our position. Again, that's a very nice expression, not one that might readily come to mind if you're a B language speaker or a student, but will sound very nice if you're doing consecutive or simultaneous. The second way these things work, this learning by heart works, is that you can take collocations out of the text that you've learnt by heart. So just pairs of words or groups of words. So in the example I gave, you could use the collocations concern has been expressed, a nice little package, or UK service personnel. That's a nice collocation denoting all of the armed forces. Alternatively, set out our position. That too is a nice example of collocation. Steps we intend to take at the end of the passage, the same. And lastly, this also works because instead of taking the words out of the extract that you've learnt by heart, you can use the grammatical structures and put different words in. So using the same structures but for completely different subjects. So if you look at the example that was on the screen again, instead of talking about UK service personnel and depleted uranium, you could use much of the same passage to say the following. During the last few days, surprise has been expressed by journalists and doctors about possible exposure of NHS radiologists and nurses to X-ray radiation in hospitals. It is suggested that some NHS medical staff may have become ill as a result. And this afternoon I will set out our position on X-ray exposure and list the steps we intend to take. So you see there how the same passage can be used in a completely different subject area, but you're benefiting from the nice syntactic style of that original English. So I really recommend learning by heart. It's one of my favourite exercises. I've done it with English, my A language, but also with Polish, one of my C languages, and it is very effective. And it only takes about 10 minutes every morning. So there you have 3 exercises for language enhancement. I hope they'll be useful, and good luck with your interpreting practice.